Hey everyone, this is Scott from Forgot to Grow Up. Welcome to another TV talk. Today I'm talking about why Netflix should buy Sony Pictures. So in the news today, it was announced that MGM is in talks with, or has been in talks with a couple companies like Netflix and Apple about an acquisition, and that got me thinking. And I made a couple videos already, which I'll link in the cards here, about why Apple should buy MGM but won't, and why Amazon should buy MGM. And so this video actually, I'll be talking about why Netflix should buy Sony Pictures. So yeah, that's kind of a weird kind of way I got to this, but they were in talks to MGM about buying MGM, which I think would be a fine idea for Netflix to buy. I just don't think out of the companies involved, I think they're the ones that maybe have the least amount to spend on it, versus Apple and Amazon, who have billions and billions of dollars, and Netflix does have billions of dollars. They don't quite have quite as many billions of dollars as Amazon and Apple. So that being said, it did get me thinking about, well, what should Netflix buy? What content library that's kind of up for sale should they buy? And Sony Pictures is one that stuck out in my mind, and I had to go look it up. And it was because back in like September, actually just before like the Spider-Man Sony or the Marvel Spider-Man Sony thing happened, there was a few little things about the possibility of Sony Pictures being up for sale, and it just pretty much comes down to Sony, the company, is pretty much open to selling Sony Pictures at almost any point, because it's, I think, one of their less profitable branches. So that kind of has always kind of stuck in my head. And I think at the time, one of the things that was actually talked about was that I think Amazon and Jeff Bezos was actually interested in buying Sony Pictures. And yeah, they can go do that too, and that kind of falls under all the same reasons that I talk about in my, like I said, my why Amazon should buy MGM video, which I linked here. If you check that out, all the reasons why they should buy MGM also apply to why they should buy Sony Pictures. But I felt it was a little more fun to talk about Netflix and why they in particular should buy Sony Pictures, even more so than Amazon. Like, yes, it's a good idea for Amazon, but I think it's an even better idea for Netflix to buy Sony Pictures. And at first this was mainly sparked because Sony has Spider-Man, but then I did a little research, and it turns out it's possible. This wasn't kind of confirmed because this is one of those things you have to actually be able to see the paperwork, but it seems that it's more than likely, I should say, that Sony, if they were to sell Sony Pictures, the Spider-Man rights would then actually revert back to Marvel, which actually explains why Marvel has never thought about buying Sony to get the Spider-Man rights back, because they can get them back for free if Sony decides to sell to somebody else. So it's not like they won't lose the Spider-Man rights to somebody else besides Sony, if Sony were to ever try to sell. At least that's from what I understand from what I read about it, at least. So yeah, that being said, the Spidey thing was the thing that first sparked it for me, because I thought it'd be fun, since Netflix and Marvel have already worked together on TV series already, and with the Defenders and Daredevil and that. I thought it would be fun for that Netflix to buy Sony and be able to place that Marvel and them start to play together again. But then I read that it's possible it's not being transferred, so if they were to sell, so that did put a little bit like, but that being said, there is still a few good reasons why Netflix should still buy Sony Pictures, and that comes down to that Sony Pictures still has some other great franchises that would, I think, really benefit Netflix, which I think, not that they're hurting it at all, but I think what Netflix is missing right now, and that they're trying to kind of catch up on, is an established content library. And they've done a great job in these last few years, giving us more and more originals, and they've sped that up, and I'm very happy with most of the ones they've given us, or at least the ones I actually watch. But that being said, they still are missing, I think, like, this kind of all sparked a little bit actually by Disney, which is Disney has the fact that they have all their stuff now on their thing, and I think that's a little bit more where we're heading in the future, is more and more of these streaming services are gonna, or more of these studios are gonna have their own stuff on their own thing, and that's the easiest way to kind of have your own brand identity via a streaming service. And that's the thing, like Netflix brand identity is that you watch anything, you binge anything, and they're slowly getting you into the, there are a lot of original stuff more than having other things, but even then they're still trying to keep The Office on it and stuff like that. So I think they would really benefit from buying Sony Pictures, who does have an extensive content library of different franchises outside of just Spider-Man. So things like we've got Bad Boys, Ghostbusters, Jumanji, the Men in Blacks, Resident Evil, and Underworld, and just so many more. There's, and then I didn't even remember to write down all the TV series because those get a little more complicated about who actually has the distribution rights to those. But that being said, I believe they still have a bunch of different TV series like 21 Jump Street and etc. Not that we need that rebooted necessarily, the TV series, but there are other TV franchises that Sony owns that I think if Netflix were to buy Sony Pictures, they would then be able to adapt and pretty much do what they're already doing now, but with just even more recognizable IPs that are like kind of already exist that they could then build on. Things like Ghostbusters, they could do a new animated series for kids and things like that. So I think it'd really benefit Netflix especially to be able to have this have a kind of core library, which I talked a lot about in my other videos too, which I'll link here. But yes, so I think that they would really benefit from having a more core library outside of their originals, which that we then know is where the place you go to watch, to watch Sony Picture movies, you go to Netflix. I think having that kind of association, a little bit more like knowing for certain what's going to be on Netflix is, I think, one of the things that is a little bit of a hindrance sometimes, like the fact that you go to try and watch something that was on last month but now isn't, because a lot of things they don't own, and they're trying to get around that by creating more and more originals. But like, we don't all always watch originals, and we do sometimes want to rewatch things, and so I think they would particularly benefit from having getting a core content library, and I think Sony just mesh up really well with like what they already are doing with their original series. Like, they've got a bunch of different comic book series and comic book adaptation series and things like that have been really successful, or at least in my mind. So I think that they could benefit from having a big content library to draw from, or a bigger content library than they already have, that a more established, not necessarily a more established one, but one that's been around longer via Sony Pictures, that has a little bit more of a legacy, not quite as big as the MGM one, but the MGM one's a lot bigger. I don't think, to be honest, I don't think Netflix can afford MGM, but it's possible they could afford Sony Pictures, particularly if Spidey's not in the deal. If Spidey's not in the deal, I'm pretty sure Netflix could afford it, but it's hard to say. Jumanji did make a good amount of money this year, but then Men in Black didn't last year, so it's a flip-flop. But that being said, I think they'd really benefit it from having pretty much just more IP to work with, which then also equals more merch, which I think is one of the things that Netflix has done a lot better job of with their original series, and getting more of them out with having a bunch of merch out for them, because you gotta have merch to make that extra money outside of it. That's how Disney does it. And so I think them buying a content library that already consists of a bunch of IP, which hopefully they maybe still have some of the merch right, or the merchandising rights too. That being said, that's a very deep divey stuff that it's very hard to find. But that being said, I think they would still heavily benefit from having taking Sony's, which I think would just mash up a little bit more than MGM. MGM's properties like Bond and RoboCop and Rocky would kind of fit, but I think I think the franchises like Ghostbusters and Men in Black in particular, and Resident Evil and Underworld, I think those would fit a lot better, or a little bit more with what Netflix has been doing lately than what MGM's kind of big franchises are. But at the same time, if they could afford it, get both, get everything. But I think all these companies should buy everything, because I just want them all to be on the 3 services I have. But that's my own little selfishness. But yeah, that's pretty much all my thoughts on why Netflix should buy Sony Pictures. If you're curious to hear more of my thoughts on the couple videos I already mentioned through this, I'll be sure to link them at the end of this video, and I'll also link my playlist for my different TV talks and cinema chats, which are a bunch of different news things that I just make up my thoughts about. But yes, thanks again for joining me today. Sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and have a good one.